So congratulations, you've now started the game. Maybe you're playing the save file that I included on the last video, and again you can find links to that down in the description below if you want it. Maybe you started for yourself, but you're now actually playing Crusader Kings 3. Now what I'm going to do in this video is just talk you through a little bit about understanding character mechanics and characters in game, because that's really important to understand. If you're coming from other grand strategy titles, you're going to be used to the idea of thinking about places. You will think of yourself, and probably are thinking of yourself, saying, I'm playing as a Pyrrhus. But this is the important distinction between Crusader Kings 3 and other strategy titles. You're not playing a Pyrrhus. You're playing Duke John. Duke John just happens to currently be the Duke of Epirus. If we get things right, he might even become the king of Epirus. But right now, he is only the Duke. And he might lose that title, and we would still be in the game as long as he held one of the other minor titles. He's the count of these 4 places. We'd still be in the game. This is the difference between Crusader Kings 3 and other grand strategies. Again, it's not a map painter. So you're always playing a specific character, and when Duke John dies, assuming we have an heir of our dynasty, we will play as that heir. And that's how the game progresses. Life, death, life, death. So let's talk a bit about Duke John here and what his traits are. And again, if you're playing the save file I've included, you'll be looking at exactly the same thing. But because the game randomizes starts slightly for non-historical characters, i.e. unless you're playing as Alfred of Wessex or something, then if you started your own independent game, your stats might look slightly different. And frankly, you might even have different children. But don't worry, the logic I'm going to give you here applies to all of these things. So let's say what we know about Duke John. Well, the first thing we can tell is that he married, and that's good, that's useful. Wives and children and marrying children off is how you get alliances in the game, and it's through alliances with other people that you are able to take over territory, expand your title range, not lose them, and all of that kind of thing. So we're already married. We're married to Duchess Theodora here. She is a dishonourable antagonist. And you'll notice that there's lots of pop-ups in this game. They'll tell you all of this stuff when you hover over them. But let's not worry too much about all of her traits and things. Again, I'm not telling you everything here. I want you to discover stuff for yourself. But the key things to note, and you should do this in any start we're doing, is going, well, what is Duke John's situation in the world? We're already married. We already have 2 children. Now, they're both daughters. Now, that means that as things stand, if we died tomorrow in-game, our daughter here, Barbara, would be taking over, and that would become our new character. That would be who we would be playing as next. Now, ideally, for an easy game, and because misogyny was a massive thing in a medieval world, male heirs are better as in this particular Byzantine Empire. So what we're really going to be pushing for, King Henry VIII style, is we're hoping that our wife is going to give us a son. And she's 27. So she's got another 15 years of being fertile, and for us to get jiggy with her to get another boy out of her, which would be really good. But what it does mean is we need to just be a bit careful about marrying our daughters off, because if we marry them off badly, we might lose the game before we've even begun. Because when we marry them, if we don't matrilineally marry them, rather than patrilineally marry them, then we're going to have issues. But I'll talk a bit about that in a future video. In the next video we'll talk about that. We also know that we have a liege. We are a subject of Vassalage Basil here. He is the ruler of the entire Byzantine Empire. We are part of the Byzantine Empire, which means we pay him a little bit of tax each year and give him a little bit of troops, and in return, theoretically, he protects us and does wonderful things. Brilliant. Not going to worry about that for now. But just be aware we are part of the Byzantine Empire. What else do we then need to think about with John? Well, these things are John's character traits. Playing in line with his character traits, when we get events and things throughout the game, is going to be rewarded. Playing counter to those traits is going to not be rewarded, because this is about roleplay. This game is about roleplay. So what do we know about Duke John? Well, he's greedy. That means we're earning a bit more money each month from our territory. But it also means that we're not quite as good as diplomacy. People don't like us as much. He's compassionate. That's actually counteracting with that diplomacy +2. It's counteracting our greed negative. But it means we're not really getting a net positive out of either traits. It means because we're compassionate, we're less good at intrigue. We're going to be less good at trying to murder people or not being murdered ourselves. But, you know, it's still a virtuous trait, so actually it's giving us a bit more piety each month. We're also lazy, and lazy, as you can see, is just giving us a general negative across the board. And then finally, these are our kind of underlying personality traits, but in Crusader Kings, when you're a child, you get educated. And the result of that education, for us, was quite good. We became a 3 out of 5 star kind of expert in stewardship. So actually, we are quite a good economic manager. It's probably the best way to think of it. So what that all means is it translates into these numbers down here, which is almost kind of our skill points. And the best way to think of is 10 is a bit of a baseline on this. And as you can see here, that means we've got 5. We're poor at diplomacy, and that's giving us some negatives. We're not great at martial. We're not a very good soldier. In fact, if you look, our actual prowess on the battlefield, if we're in an actual fight, fist fight, sword fight, whatever, we have a prowess of 1. That's awful. Remember, 10 is baseline at best. We're awful. Frankly, I suspect actually that our daughter might even be as good as us already. Like, our daughter could beat us up. Right now, our daughter could beat us up. Like, that's how bad we are personally at fighting. So again, these are things we need to be aware of as we're playing the game, because if we try and play counter to them, we're going to make life harder for ourselves. We are very, very good, well, good, at stewardship. Now, stewardship is really important to have when you're starting out the game and when you're with your first ruler or when you're small. And I'll talk a bit more about that in a future video. But for now, work on the basis that certainly with smaller rulers, stewardship is good. It's going to be increasing the amount of tax we're getting, and it's increasing something called our domain limit. And the domain limit is really how much territory can we control before our own vassals and the people around us start going, he's got control of more land than he's very good at controlling. You know, before we start getting negatives and not earning as much money because we're trying to do too much, how can we do? And this is actually quite a good start for that. So it's not a great start because we're also terrible at spying and being intrigueful. We're also terrible at learning, but at least we're good at one thing, and we're good at stewardship. So that tells us a bit about John. And as you can see, we've got things like our money and everything else, and these are also useful, but because this is our character, these are also the figures you'll see in this top right corner of the screen. So we'll finish this video by just talking a little bit about what these mean, and then we'll look at what our opening moves are in the next video. So money is our total amount of dosh we've got in the pot. Money is used for building buildings. It's also used for certain things like fabricating claims on other territory, because if we want to go to a war, we need to fabricate a claim. And there'll be various events throughout the game that will offer us opportunities if we pay some money. So earning money early on is very, very critical, and we've actually got a very good income here. We've got 3.4, which might not sound a lot, but for the level we are, that's actually very good. Prestige is how the world thinks of us, and certain actions, such as our ability to invade larger territories, are dependent on the world thinking we're pretty good at what we do. And right now, we're not really known for anything. We just exist. Piety is how well the church thinks of us. And right now the church doesn't really think an awful lot of us, good or bad either. So that's what we are. And finally, renown. And renown is how much does the world think about our dynasty. So remember that this is a dynasty simulator. So prestige is almost kind of our personal glory. Renown is what the world thinks about our family. And there are things we can spend renown on as the game goes on. That are very useful, and all of these things really are things that are going to be boosted by taking control of more territory and playing the game well. And then the last two numbers you see here are, this is how many soldiers we've got, and this is how many territories we can hold before we hit that limit I talked about having issues of people going, well, you can't handle that much territory. And you can see that right now we're directly holding 4 bits of territory. We've got four counties that we're essentially holding on to, but we could potentially have up to 6. And those 4 are these ones here with the blue labels on. These are things we directly control ourselves. All the money and income and troops that are coming from these territories are ours to do with as we wish. Now, of course, we are also a duke, And if I hover over this bit here, you can see the bit highlighted in purple is telling you which duchy we control. It's also telling you which territory we don't control is technically part of our duchy. So you could see that Ayatollah here, by kind of de jure right, is part of our territory. It just happens to be that I suspect this is the Duke of Athens as it's got it at the moment. That's the duchy. So we, in addition to having our own territory within here, are getting our own levies in the same way as we're giving them to our ruler off of the bits of territory that we don't control in here. But again, we'll talk about that at another time. And finally, it's just worth noting that we actually do start with a second duchy title. We have a second duchy. It's a very small duchy, but it is a duchy nonetheless, which is a duchy of Kefalonia. And we control bits of territory there. And you'll notice that this is a good example because we control the capital of that duchy, which is how we got the duchy title. But we actually have a subject here. We have a Count Constantios here is actually our subject, and he holds another bit of territory. But because that is de jure part of Kefalonia, it means he offers his service to us, not to the Byzantine Emperor directly. So, again, just to reiterate, character matters. We are the character of Duke John. When we die right now, we will become the character of Barbara. If we have a son, we will become that character instead, because that character will inherit stuff. But it is always about playing the character. And learning to read these things when you start with a character is important. You know, we know what our skills are. We know, looking at this, that we're probably quite good at ruling, but we're terrible personally at everything else. So we're going to need other characters to help us with everything else. You know, we know that we have 952 troops. That's probably quite decent. You know, if we click on and compare it to our other rulers around us, because it's always relative, we can see that actually we have more or equal mostly to the people around us. But that means we're probably going to want to get a good ally to deal things early on. But we're in a good position, and that means we've got time to think now about what we actually do and how we start playing the game as Duke John. And we'll do that in the next video.